Is it beneficial to offend people when you're trying to promote liberty? In other words, let's talk some mean tweets. Ah, yes, this subject has come up way too much in the liberty movement as of late, and I feel like I should more or less directly address it. I've kind of skirted around the issue a little bit by talking about what's going on in the greater community of people who say that they promote liberty and free thinking, and basically you can do whatever you want, sort of, above all things. The center of all this, at least in my little world, which I have an important world, but whatever, is of course the Twitter account, because Twitter is a great shit posting platform, of the New Hampshire Libertarian Party. And to a lesser extent, less controversial extent, but still in there, the Free State Project's official Twitter. Whatever that even means, right? Basically, there have been some spicy tweets, some of which have been kind of harsh and rude and unapologetic in their defense of libertarian ideals, and some of which have been kind of just sort of like rude or mean or, saying distasteful type things that then cause people to say, this looks terrible, this turns people away, it looks like you're promoting bad things, all that stuff. And let me just start at the beginning as far as my journey in wrapping my head around this stuff. So I've been pro-liberty for 20 plus years, like as long as I can remember, right? And I've been in a lot of think tanky circles and things like that. I've always tried to be the best messenger of the ideology I can possibly be. And a lot of these circles where I try to get to up at the top, in DC, the Beltway, things like that, people have had to choose their words very carefully as far as promoting liberty, because basically you're saying, hey, this is a radical ideology for a lot of people. Everyone wants more government. Some people want slightly smaller, huge government. The other people want slightly bigger, but both of them want something huge and disastrous, and we want as little as possible. So in order to not just be called kooks and crazies right away, we have to be as nice and approachable as possible, as reasonable as possible. And like Reason Magazine, everything's reasonable. We're the nice, reasonable people. And of course, I always sort of subscribe to that because, you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. Why would you want to be a raving lunatic to try to promote something that people already don't quite really agree with you on necessarily? And so from this perspective, I went on an interesting journey from, I would say, not quite a 180, but it took me a little bit when I started seeing this more aggressive approach by certain people who remain unnamed in the liberty movement to sort of promote this message publicly. And it very much went in the vein of, I would say, Trumpism in a certain way. Now, it's not a political statement. That's a purely branding statement, a purely promotional statement. Because Trump said mean things all the time. I don't think he's particularly any meaner or any worse than any other politician. In fact, I think he probably was not as corrupt and not as terrible, that's a very low bar, as some other people, it turned out. But what really turned a lot of people off was that he said mean things. Oh, you're fat, you're lazy, disgusting, the worst. Just was always on that stuff. But a lot of people, that's really all they liked about him. Of course, this ended up with people conflating things about him that just weren't true. Positive things I'm talking about. People saying, oh yeah, he's a man of the people. He fights for us and our rights. Oh yeah, he believes in all this stuff. In the meantime, he's like restricting guns. He's like not really ending the wars. He keeps on bombing people. He's expanding socialist programs. Like all this stuff that I hate, he kept doing, but he had people on his side because he spoke in a certain way. And it took me a while to wrap my head around that thing, but he was just communicating to certain people a certain message that was not in the words themselves. It was in the tone. The tone was communicating a message. And so now we have with the Libertarian Party specifically, but, also a lot of other high-profile libertarian people from 2012 to 2016 and 2020, a lot of that time is speaking in these kinds of conciliatory tones, saying libertarian things, but trying to maybe just sort of watering down the impact of the message while trying to make sure to sound as reasonable as possible. That was a huge criticism of Gary Johnson in especially his second presidential campaign and all that around it. And basically, the Libertarian Party being not principled, but trying to get along with people who don't like it. And that caused, of course, a backlash, an uprising, as it were. The Mises Caucus comes in. A lot of people start to, try to turn it back to principles. And then, of course, we get into the messaging wars, where now we have people sending very different messages, right? One of the things that was the most criticized from the old thing was former candidate Jo Jorgensen, with whom I have no complaints. I don't really know her too well, or I haven't super analyzed all her actual positions and things. But she did some tweet about Black Lives Matter, using the hashtag with little fists in the air or whatever. And I didn't really have a problem with that. Because, I do believe all lives matter. I believe everyone has a right to, dignity and rights and all that kind of stuff. And I acknowledge that there's some groups that have suffered a lot more than others. And so that seemed very reasonable to me. A lot of people were very livid at that, though. For me, I was like, nah, wow, you're just overreacting the tone. The thing is, that sent out a message of conciliation, that we're on you guys' side. We're on the side of certain people. Now, as far as whose side are you on, if you're on the side of people who are suffering from oppression, that's definitely one thing. The problem is the message that seemed to get across, and I have to be careful because with this messaging war, this has all been a subliminal messaging war. The actual words of the actual principles of all that has not really been different, but there's been a 180 in subliminal messaging, and a lot of people are fighting over that. And I kind of, in my, I guess, dumbness, just not being that bright, just was like saying, oh, well, this seems reasonable. These are accurate things. These guys seem accurate things. Stop fighting. The tone is just whatever. Who cares about the tone? Just be nice or something. But the subliminal messaging is all the messaging in these cases. And in the former case, the subliminal messaging being, this is a popular leftist movement founded by Marxists that has been used to kind of package all kinds of things. Like even the Kyle Rittenhouse case has been like a BLM issue, even though it was like a white dude just shooting white dudes, but it's somehow packaged into that. So it was signaling subliminal support for that. Whether or not that was the intent, it probably was the intent, let's be honest. But that rubbed a lot of people who are actually liberty adherents the wrong way. And a lot of the same types of people saying those types of things, again, we're being very collectivist here. I know how much libertarians hate collectivism, but in doing all that, a lot of those people were also being conciliatory on the things that really mattered. Our rights, our freedom, our ability to retain our money from extortion, all this kind of stuff. Especially the lockdown issue, the COVID issue, with the entire world just getting oppressed because of this disease. This is the time when you need to oppose global tyranny. If you're being all milquetoast about it, that's not the time. That's not going to cut it. That's absolutely unacceptable. And of course, that's not the same as like tweeting out BLM or something, but like that same tone, that same dog whistle, that same subliminal message ended up getting out there. And now there's the opposite coming back. When you have certain individuals tweeting out certain things that are a little bit, I guess, aggressively phrased, just sound kind of, just make us uncomfortable inside the way, oh, why is he saying that so mean? It's like, even though you can't really disagree with the principled message from a libertarian standpoint, from a liberty standpoint, can't really disagree with that, but you don't like the way it's being said. There's a reason for that communication. It took me a while to figure this out. I thought it was just mean tweets, but then I saw the reaction to the mean tweets, right? Over the year, I don't know, I've seen mean tweets go out saying mean things, bludgeony phrasing behind pro-liberty principles and things, but I was like, oh man, this is no good. Like, you're saying this, you're going to turn off a lot of reasonable allies. You're going to piss off a lot of people. Just say it. You can be bold, but just don't be bold and like brutalist about it. Don't be quite so based, right? But then I saw the people who were freaking out. All of a sudden, there's people who are freaking out about this. The people who have the biggest opposition end up being freaking statists. They end up being communist apologists, big government people, whatever, not sound on the issues. And it's flushed them out. It's kind of like exposed them. The tone, the brutal tone, those people have freaked out. And that's the one thing I really realized, that this is a subliminal messaging war. As I said a million times, subliminal messaging war. It's not the words, it's the undercurrent. And so the words are all okay on both sides. Just the undercurrent in the phrasings of things makes people really, on certain levels, like super upset. And before I give some examples, I should point out that this cuts in both directions. It's not just chase out the people who aren't really part of this belief system, people that don't actually have a firm commitment to making the world a freer place. It's not just chase those people out, it's a communication of the opposite. Because when you have people who are yearning to be free, because the world is a crazy freaking place right about now, when you have people who are yearning to be free, then they see someone using language about that's similar to the oppressor, right? Giving appeasement language, that doesn't stick with them. They're not going to be attracted to that, even though it's like, well, if you dig into the thing, their principles is pro-liberty. No. They just see that you're signaling support to the enemy of freedom, the objective enemy of freedom, by the way. But then when you see someone being super counter to that in the subliminal messaging, they see, oh, this person is not afraid to stand up to the power like Trump did, except Trump was a big piece of shit, right? Actually stand up to the power and say good, honest, great pro-liberty things while being kind of mean and, a little distasteful about it. So what it does is it communicates to some people, get out of here, we don't want you. You're not committed to making the world a freer place. You're going to be a liability in the end. You're going to stop us and end up being our enemies and end up enslaving us, right? To those people. But then the other people, we actually believe these kinds of things. We don't just say little lip service to freedom, but we're still going to host this stuff. We're going to fight for your freedom, for your money, for your family, for everything. The free future you want is safe with us. And that's a very strong message that way. And it's meant to do these two things at the same time. Let me hit a few controversial examples. And as a disclaimer, I do not necessarily sign off on these examples as being good. I do not necessarily sign off on this as saying, I think that's how I would say it. I'm just explaining what they are and the effect that I perceive that they have had. So there's one that was, unfortunately phrased, basically saying that the abolishment of taxation would cause more good than the harm of trans people being murdered in a certain quantity, which is, it's kind of a gross way of comparing things to like human life, like certain people that actually are getting killed versus, ending taxes, which people view as like, you pay a little money, whatever, but then these people get murdered. It's an ugly situation. It's an ugly mental image, but at the same time is kind of right. Because when you think about it, all the world's taxation, not only stealing from people, ends up making medical advancements not go as fast because there's not as much research funding. It means standards of living can't go high enough so that people can live longer and happier. It costs lives from the extraction, more lives than, at least in the US, than people who are murdered for being trans, which I think is a disgusting thing to happen to. Got to be very clear for myself here. And more importantly, it funds the government apparatus, which kills and hurts and destroys a hell of a lot. And so if we got rid of taxation, that would be a much greater boon than getting rid of this other thing. And as I said before, it's a gross, it doesn't make you feel good comparison. But if you see that, if you know about liberty, you agree. And so If you say that, it says to some people, this guy stands for freedom. Really, this guy understands it. We're over the same target, and he's not worried about hurting people's feelings to get that message out. And what it says to other people is this principle of reducing government and reducing oppression on people is bigger than individual groups' feelings, let's say. Or even, again, the life comparison's a little dicey. Again, this is not something I would have said, but I'm just saying is it pisses off the kinds of people who care about getting along with other people or signaling support from others more than they care about the principles. And then the opposite. People who care about freedom are going to be drawn to that. Let's talk another one. There's another about the Rittenhouse thing. Someone was saying if this guy was black, if he was not a white kid, you guys would not be supporting him or whatever. The response to that, somewhere along the lines of not only would we support him, but we would possibly nominate him for president. Of course, that's a full-throated defense of his right to self-defense in the case where he was physically assaulted by some people, including with a firearm, direct threat to his life. He took defensive action, and he survived because of that. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and that was a great communication of that principle, that there's nothing wrong with what Kyle Rittenhouse did. Now, on the other hand, it came with a little twist of if a black man shot communists like that legally, with the asterisk legally, we elect him for president. And then, oh, he's talking about shooting communists. That's terrible. You shouldn't want to murder people and violent and whatever, blah, blah, blah. That's true. The problem is it clearly states it's legal, meaning it's a self-defense situation. And just the bonus is, oh, the bonus is you're killing commies. And that's a little bit gauche, I think. But people who take an issue with that over the self-defense narrative are the people that you want to offend versus the people you want to make a defense of. And then that little zinger of just communists rather than legal and lawful self-defense, rather than saying that, but killing commies, just that little sizzle on that steak. What it does is it shows that you have a very strong commitment to principles and you believe that communists and communism brings about destruction of property and, more importantly, of lives, millions of lives, and you're willing to stand against communism. The subliminal messaging is working. It's telling those people on this side, we stand for your stuff. We stand against tyranny, against communism, for freedom. Come with us. And that message was received. On the other side, it stands, if you wishy-washy around this basic right to self-defense from armed violence, just because, be nice to the communists or something, screw off, get out of here. And that message is well received. And there's countless of these examples that you can pick apart bit by bit and then find out, I got so upset because, and they say something that's a little bit distasteful. And I represent myself. If I said things like that, that would not be doing myself a service because I am not a brutalist. I am not, generally speaking, a rude person. I'm not an uncaring person. I don't want to just say those things because that's not who I am. I'm not going to represent those things. I believe in liberty, but I'm not going to be mean about it, right? Now, I'm not saying the person who is doing these things is necessarily that, but they don't mind doing that because it's a megaphone. I'm not a megaphone. I'm me. I have my own voice. But as the megaphone to project a very strong pro-liberty message with a very strong subliminal message that we're unapologetically for freedom and will fight for it in all ways, while hitting the other unapologetic message, which is we don't care to appease people who aren't our friends, who aren't going to fight for us. That combo, that's what that's all about. Now, sometimes there might be some things that are explicitly stated that aren't necessarily true or against principles in the service of this sort of brutalist subliminal messaging. In that case, that is just not good, by the way. And there's one recent one about something like racism isn't really a problem in the U.S. Libertarians are the smallest minority, the most historically oppressed minority and stuff. And I agree with the sentiment of like libertarians are more oppressed because basically liberty is the minority philosophy, and people who want to just live in peace are consistently oppressed by the government. That is true, and that's the overarching thing. And the subliminal thing with that thing is, again, we don't care to be conciliatory towards people who don't support us. And on the other hand, yeah, you see how dedicated we are to the cause. The problem with that is the phrasing of racism is basically a non-issue in the US, which is something I do not agree with. I do believe that it is still an issue, and I think that by saying something incorrect, that's not a hitter. That's not 100%, right? But again, no one bats 1,000. I represent myself. I'm just breaking down what this whole thing is about. So next time you get infuriated over all these mean tweets, realize that that's all it is. It's a subliminal messaging war. And if you find yourself consistently more upset at the meanness of some tweets, or the, ew, makes me feel gross about some things, that might actually be telling you something about yourself that you don't want to know. If that's the case, feel free to comment, and we will have a back and forth discussion, and I'll see if I can ferret out the real source of the problem. That's probably not finding it distasteful or, oh, this is terrible. It's probably, you might be a little milquetoast on liberty yourself. Probably. Again, I'm just guessing. But anyway, yeah, leave lots of comments, you angry people. See you next time.